It appears the Royals are planning to move Kris Bubic to the rotation in 2025. What do we think about it? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Or you can also find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about this show, we are based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. It's pretty funny that yesterday's episode was more so, I guess, walking back the words I had last week on one of our episodes, going over trade candidates, how the Royals may address their rotation. And because of an article that came out this week about the Royals and what their next move would be on The Athletic, I had to walk back some of my words. Not that I thought they were going to go one way or another, but it was mainly the way that I would have pursued things. You know, the Royals had a hole in their rotation. I thought you addressed that first just to make sure you got everything shored up, and then you go after and find your slugger. And if you went after your slugger, you're probably going through free agency since you already traded your big trade piece in Brady Singer. Then we find out the Royals want to go after their middle of the order bat through trade, and they're going to wait to address the rotation. And it's not really going to be a starter they're going after. At least that's the feeling right now. The feeling is if they're going to go after somebody for the rotation, it'll be a swing man that helps the depth a little bit. So to go one step further in that, walking back more of my words, I mean, we had an episode on Kris Bubic, I believe, 1 week ago exactly. And the idea was that Kris Bubic could start in the rotation. I was coming around on the idea. I could see some of the reasoning behind it. Some of the commenters, some of the followers said, hey, what's the proof that we have that he can be a good big league starter? We got the proof that he can be a good back-end bullpen guy, but the only time he was a consistent good starter was for 3 starts in 2023. There were moments in 21 and 22, but overall, nothing really came away as a good frontline starter. But fortunately for the Royals, and I think fortunately for Kris Bubic, their plan to move him to the rotation is not to make him a frontline guy. They got their top 3, right? If Kris Bubic is going to the rotation, which the reports coming out now indicate they plan to move him to the rotation, they are asking him to be a number 4, number 5 starter. And in the article I read yesterday, it came from MLB Trade Rumors, of course, referencing the article from The Athletic. I think Ken Rosenthal, Katie Wu were on it. They're not going to be asking 180, 190 innings from Kris Bubic, which I think if you're being realistic, you're not asking that of any number 4 or number 5 starter. For your number 4 and number 5 starter, you're hoping to get about 140 to 150. And that's what I think the Royals will be hoping for when it comes to Kris Bubic. You want to stretch him out, you want to lengthen him, but you're not going to overdo it, especially for a guy that is not really that far removed from Tommy John surgery. It's one thing to have had Tommy John, 4 or 5 years ago. You're not really worried about that anymore. I'm not saying the Royals should be concerned about Tommy John going into 2025. But in terms of bulking up his arm, making sure he can be a starter again, that does have to be in the back of your mind of, hey, can we get him to that level? Can we trust him to go 5, 6, 7 innings if he's really feeling well? And those are all going to be things that the Royals are going to sort through. But even in these last 7 days, I think the more and more that we've heard come out of the Royals, the reports leading into the winter meetings, I got to be honest, I think I'm really starting to come around, even more so than I was last week, on the idea of Kris Bubic starting. And I think what I came up with today is that I'm not really concerned that Kris Bubic is going to be bad in the rotation. Like, I just don't have this feeling that Kris Bubic is going to get moved to the rotation and then go back to 2021 version of Kris Bubic. I don't see that happening. What it's going to come down to, in all honesty, is can he stay healthy? Like, that to me is the question you got to judge. Can Kris Bubic stay healthy? And if he can't, who's your depth, right? Who's the depth piece there? And I think that kind of leads into this swing man that the Royals want to go out and get. You want to be sure that if somebody is to get banged up or if they can't do it, that guy can step into that role. Maybe that's Michael Lorenzen. Maybe that's somebody we're not even talking about. But to me, I just don't think that there's much of a harm in moving somebody from the bullpen to the rotation. There are negatives to it, right? That you could mentally damage them and now they don't think that they can be as good of a pitcher. I don't see that with Kris Bubic simply because he has started before. He's got experience starting. He had never had experience in a setup role, and he took on that role just fine. But if you move Kris Bubic to the rotation, and again, I think it comes down to a matter of health. I don't think it comes down to a matter of success. I think we saw a glimpse of what Kris Bubic could be in the rotation in 2023. And I thought that was a guy who could be a top 3 arm in the rotation. Of course, that was before Reagans, Lugo, and Waka all formed in Kansas City. But to be a number 4, I think there's a chance that Kris Bubic could be better than Brady Singer. Maybe not get the same amount of innings, but in terms of success, counting on them every 5th day, I think Kris Bubic could really give you a good look in that spot. I love the spin rate. I love the slider usage. He was throwing a sinker and a cutter last year as well. He mix and matches a lot of different pitches, which sets up that really good changeup that he can have. So you bring that to the rotation. Let's say, to go against my point of it's a matter of health, let's say it doesn't work out. Let's say that he does regress to 2022 version Kris Bubic or the 2021 version of Kris Bubic. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say, okay, it didn't work out. We're moving him back to the bullpen, and he could pick up where he left off. It may take some time. It may take a few weeks to get him back into the swing of throwing just 1 inning instead of working on 4 or 5 or 6 innings, but it's doable. To me, I think the nail in the coffin on a pitcher is when you move them from the rotation where they've always been. You move into the bullpen and it doesn't work out there. Because at that point, you're mentally screwed up. I can't pitch out of the bullpen. I can't pitch in the rotation. I thought the Royals handled it really poorly when it came to Jacob Junis. Like, Jacob Junis was starting. I thought he had great stuff. They thought it could play better in the bullpen. It didn't. He goes to San Francisco where he pitches really well. Now I think he's in Cincinnati or Milwaukee, one of those teams. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, but he's had some success since leaving the Royals. But when it comes to Kris Bubic, the guy has starting experience, and we know what he can do in the bullpen. And, the more I think about it, it would be foolish for the Royals not to try it. Because if that's as good as Kris Bubic can be, right? If the 8th inning, the setup guy is the best he'll ever be, that's still there. That can still be a possibility, right? But if you stick him there and you say, this is his job, this is the role he's going to have, you may be kicking yourself that you never tried him out again in the rotation, because the upside here is far more valuable to the team than having a good setup guy or above average setup guy. I understand bullpen's important. I'm not trying to say it's not. But you think about it, where Kris Bubic was recovering from Tommy John. He joins mid-season, right? He is a long reliever, and then it didn't take long for him to jump into the setup role by default. Let's be honest. The Royals bullpen was that bad. They didn't have a setup guy. He got an opportunity. He ran away with it. That's also just finding a guy that worked. We would be naive in thinking that the Royals just couldn't do that again with anybody. Look what they turned Sam Long into. Sam Long rediscovered his San Francisco Giants form and not the Oakland A's form. John Schreiber found himself again. Angel Serpa toward the postseason found himself again. Somebody can emerge. Why can't it be Hunter Harvey? And I think the best case scenario for the Royals is that Kris Bubic moves to the rotation. He shines there. Hunter Harvey bounces back. You got a good setup guy for Lucas Erceg. Or if you want to be aggressive, move Kris Bubic to the rotation and sign a setup guy. Spend some money on Carlos Estevez, right? Spend some money on a back-end guy like Tommy Canely. Go shore up the 8th inning where you feel a little bit more comfortable about moving Kris Bubic to the rotation. But I start to dream about a scenario in which Kris Bubic brings that 8th inning stuff to the rotation. I also understand it's easier said than done to take what you had in 1 inning, bottle it up, and use it for 5 innings. There are more looks, right? You get through 2 or 3 times in the order. People know what you're going to be throwing. But he's also got this plethora of pitches now to work with. He's not just fastball changeup, which is what we saw in 21 and 22, even in his debut year in the COVID year. Like, you're relying on the changeup to be the put-away pitch. Now there's more to go to, especially that slider that Brian Sweeney had him start throwing in 2023. And if it works out, man, that's a really good 1, 2, 3, 4 in a rotation. And I would argue that if Kris Bubic does take that type of stuff to the rotation, that may be the best rotation in the American League. That may be a top 3 rotation in all of baseball if they continue that success from the previous year. But right now, if that's the Royals' plan, one of the best things I was ever told from somebody within the organization was these guys eat, breathe, dream about the sport, right? The front office people, the coaches, they're around these guys all the time. If they believe that Kris Bubic can make that jump, then I think we can take their word for it that they might know what they're talking about. They might have a hunch that it's going to work out. If it doesn't, not every move works out. But even myself, I thought they should leave Kris Bubic in the bullpen. There's a reason I'm not working in baseball. I talk about baseball. So when I'm talking about baseball, I got my opinions. Not everybody has to agree with them, but I'm not eating, drinking, sleeping, dreaming about the sport all the time. Some of these guys in the organization do. And if they came to the conclusion that it's the right move to move them to the rotation, I'm at least going to hear them out a little bit. If they're wrong, they're wrong. They got to die on that sword. Not saying they're going to fire him, but you can admit that was the wrong move. But I do think there's upside there, and I think the Royals would be kicking themselves down the road if they just never decided to give him a shot at the rotation again. If it doesn't work out, back to the bullpen he goes. But if he does turn out to be a good starter, you got a really strong 4 there for your rotation and might have an even better chance to top the numbers that you had from a season ago. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about the possibility of the Royals acquiring Alec Bohm and why I think that price is going to be much higher than you may think. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor in FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's a great slate in college basketball tonight. I'm going to make sure I'm done so I can catch all the games. So I'm wrapping this up rather quickly. I'm going to go with the over on assist total for DeJuan Harris Jr. and KU in their game tonight in Omaha against the Creighton Blue Jays. We're going to continue our talk about the trades in the offseason, what could be happening at winter meetings, going over some of the rumors, the smoke around the Royals heading into the winter meetings. It should be a next fun couple of days for us. Again, a reminder, we'll have an episode tomorrow. I will not be available to do an episode on Friday. Again, still dealing with the personal family stuff, but we'll be back to normal on Monday. And then on December 15th, we'll be dropping down to 3 episodes a week until about the end part of January, I think it is. But we'll have plenty of coverage during the winter meetings, whether that be on Twitter, throughout our episodes next week. We're actually going to have a special interview. So we might have a side episode next week where it's just this interview. sneak peek, it's going to be with a Royals draft pick from last season. Not Jack Caglione, but don't worry, I'm very excited for this interview. Should be a lot of fun for one of the newbies in the Royals organization. So that's all going to be coming up next week. And then you also know the schedule layout for the rest of this week and what's to come on December 15th. Speaking of the winter meeting, speaking of trades that may happen, we know by now the Royals have expressed interest in Phillies third baseman Alec Bohm. And he was, I think, entertained for a few days by the vast majority of not just Royals fans, but I think baseball fans. A couple of the articles I read, a couple of things that were being said on MLB Network, like it was a possibility, right? Because you didn't really know what Philly was going to be asking for. And if I recall correctly, when this first happened, I remember we did an episode when it came to Taylor Ward and Alec Bohm. The Royals had shown interest in both of those guys. Now it just feels increasingly likely that those phone calls weren't as extensive because of what those prices would be. When it comes to Taylor Ward, I really have no pulse on it. Are the Angels trying to win? Are the Angels trying to wait and trade Taylor Ward at the trade deadline so they've got a better grasp about where their team's at? But the fact that they are spending money and a good amount of money, it makes me think that hanging on to Taylor Ward would be in their best interest if they're giving Yusei Kikuchi that type of deal. If they're trading for Jorge Soler, they're signing Travis d'Arnaud, they're getting some middle infield depth. Like at this point, it would make no sense whatsoever to trade Taylor Ward unless they were getting major league talent in return. Still a possibility. I just haven't heard much when it comes to Taylor Ward. When it comes to Alec Bohm, that was something I was fascinated by because the Phillies are still absolutely a World Series contender. They fell short, lost to the Mets this past year, but they are a loaded bunch. They've got an elite rotation. They've got superstars almost at every single position, but they're still waiting to cash in that magical season. They came close, lost to the Astros in the World Series in 2022, but it has been a little bit of a disappointing last couple of months for them, dealing with the loss to the Mets, knowing that they're not going to be able to be in the Juan Soto sweepstakes. At least it doesn't feel like it. Feels like the front runners at this point are Boston, the Mets, the Yankees, and the Blue Jays. Like that feels like the core four there on going after Juan Soto. So you're dealing with that. How do you want to go about reconstructing this team? And Philly's going to be damn good again, whether they have Alec Bohm or not, whether they have Juan Soto or not. They're going to be a lethal team to deal with. Problem is for them, it's a loaded division. You're talking about the New York Mets being able to run it back. Maybe they do get Juan Soto. The Braves are going to be healthy. We're going to have Ronald Acuna Jr. So they're in this mode of, well, if we're trading somebody, we're still going to try to upgrade there. Like if they're trading Alec Bohm, to me, it screams that they want to upgrade at third base. And I don't think it takes a genius to know that. Does that mean they're in play for Alex Bregman? Who knows? I think it'd be a great fit in Philadelphia for Alex Bregman to go there. But if they're trading Alec Bohm, they are going to want major league talent in return. It would make no sense for Philadelphia to trade Alec Bohm and get prospects. So when we were going over trade ideas and we were throwing out prospects as a return for Alec Bohm, I just never thought it would be really that possible after we got more information about how the Phillies are viewing somebody like Alec Bohm. But today was where we got a little bit more clarity on maybe the beginning asking price for Alec Bohm. And I will never fault a team for shooting high. I think the Royals did that for a number of years in their down years on guys like Scott Barlow or Whit Merrifield, like asking for a lot, and especially since the Royals were going after major league talent. So that made it harder on other teams to negotiate with them. But this came from Adam Jude, who is a Mariners beat reporter for the Seattle Times, that when it came to Alec Bohm, the Mariners are one of those teams that are very interested. They have discussed a trade with the Phillies involving Alec Bohm. Jude notes that Philadelphia initially asked for one of Seattle's top pitchers, Logan Gilbert or George Kirby, in exchange for Bohm. Again, I'll never fault a team for shooting high because it goes back to the tale of how you ask for a raise. If you want a 10% increase, if you will, you're going to ask maybe twice as much as that when you first walk in. So you really highball it. and then you hope to get it down to what you were actually hoping for. So if it's Philadelphia trying that game, maybe they're focused on somebody like Brian Wu in Seattle. Like that's the guy they're going for. And if you ask for Logan Gilbert and George Kirby, which would not be the return for Alec Bohm, I'd be floored if Seattle did a deal like that. You get it down to where Brian Wu is the guy that is thrown out there for Alec Bohm if Seattle wanted them badly enough. But to me, not that this completely rules out the Royals, but their best major league trade chip is now gone. He's in Cincinnati. The Phillies are not going to trade Alec Bohm for Alec Marsh. They're not going to trade Alec Bohm for even Kris Bubic, I don't think. Kris Bubic is a baseball savant type guy now. He's got the upside, but the Phillies clearly want somebody that they can count on to jump into the rotation or jump into the lineup and not have much to worry about. You're not having to gamble on what that guy could be. So that's why I think it rules out the Royals a little bit. And I don't think, those talks were as extensive as maybe some people out there believe them to be. I think that it was maybe a phone call. Hey, we're interested. What's the price going to be? And then the Phillies said it would take this, and the Royals said we're good. That happens all the time in baseball. And I'm not so sure that Alec Bohm is the best option as to who's out there via trade. If we feel like the Royals are more likely to acquire their middle of the order bat through trade, Alec Bohm is certainly in the top 5 there because of what he can bring you at third base. He's an upgrade over Michael Garcia, but I think there are better options out there with more years of control and have more defensive flexibility than a guy who's probably only going to play third or first base. Like I brought up on Twitter, JJ Bleday of the Oakland A's. He's 27 years old, not really matching up on their competitive timeline. They've got 3 young outfield prospects at the minor league level. He's got years of control, not a free agent until 2029, coming off a breakout year. Perfect time for Oakland to be able to capitalize on a deal like that. That's why I think I'd put somebody like JJ Bleday over Alec Bohm if the Royals were to pull off a trade. Oakland, they're usually not a team that's going to be asking for the moon when it comes to some of their guys. They like certain prospects. We saw in the Lucas Erceg deal, they liked a handful of the Royals pitching prospects. Maybe you can dip your toe back into what Oakland has to offer. Or not Oakland anymore. I can't call them that. Just the Athletics, the Sacramento Athletics, or the Vegas Athletics, whatever you want to call them. But, JJ Bleday plays all 3 outfield spots. And I think the Royals, if they're going to acquire middle of the order bat, do want some defensive flexibility if they're having to move somebody out of position because of the Jonathan India deal. So for Alec Bohm, if that really is the asking price or it's not far from it, you can count the Royals out because I don't think they'd be willing to give up what the Phillies would be wanting for Alec Bohm. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me considering they wanted Logan Gilbert and George Kirby. If the Phillies said, yeah, if you want Alec Bohm, we want Cole Reagans. And JJ Picola said, pleasure doing business. We're moving on from this. And I would obviously love the fact that the Royals would hang up in a scenario like that because there's no need to mess anything up in the rotation with what you got right now. If the Royals are trading anybody else, it's going to be a middle infielder or maybe a bench player in a minor deal like that. They're not going to trade anybody else from that rotation because we know the top 3s are locks. We know Kris Bubic is now planning to move to the rotation. I guess Alec Marsh could, but I'm not going to call him a lock just yet. But right now, this rotation feels pretty intact for the Royals, and I feel pretty confident at this point, unless that price comes way down, the Royals are not going to be the team that is going to be acquiring Alec Bohm from the Philadelphia Phillies. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, let's touch a little bit on this golden at-bat rule and how silly it would be for Major League Baseball. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The last thing we're going to talk about on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Royals is this silly rule that Rob Manfred said is generating some buzz and might be implemented in the minor league level and then maybe in the future implemented at the major league level. And that is this golden at-bat rule. I've already gotten some comments on it from our episode yesterday wanting me to go over it. Well, here's what we're going to do. We are going to quickly wrap this up and cut down this stupid idea because that's what it is. Major League Baseball thinks that, or at least some people in Major League Baseball, I don't want to lump everybody together, but certainly Rob Manfred, that Baseball has a watchability problem because of the product on the field or how it's played, right? You have the pitch clock because the game's too slow. You have to face three batters because we don't like all the stalling when you have to go out to the mound, three times an inning. I never was a fan of it when Terry Francona would use three different guys in one inning, but if it works, it works. And I am a big believer in baseball is a game about strategy. So if you are trying to take away that strategy, seems a little bit stupid to do. Like the shift, it frustrated players, it frustrated fans when you'd see somebody hit 110 to the right side and they had three guys over there. It frustrated you, right? But it's strategy. And we don't see that in any other sport, right? We don't see in football some sort of thing that nerfs a strategy. And for baseball, in the last handful of years, there have been so many things to take away the strategy of baseball. Loogies, right? The lefty only guys, they no longer have a job because you're not bringing them in to face one guy. You technically can if they get the last out of the inning, but to open up an inning, it's ninth inning or eighth inning, and you just want to get one out, a guy that's bad against lefties, you bring in one. That doesn't happen anymore. There's pitch clock violations. There's all these things that have impacted the strategy of baseball. But I'm going to be honest, the golden at bat takes away everything. The golden at bat is trying too hard to be Savannah Banana baseball, which I love the Savannah Bananas. I think they're fun. I think they bring a different element. They certainly are a show, very relatable to the Harlem Globetrotters. People pay tickets. They sell out those places. It's fun to try to pick up on all the rules. Like, it's a very enjoyable experience. I would love to go one day. I'm stuck to just seeing all the clips that we see online. But I know people that have been, and even former baseball players that have been, and said it's awesome. It's a really cool deal. And banana ball is great. Major League Baseball doesn't need to be banana ball. And this, to me, feels like a banana ball move. And if you don't know what the golden at bat is, Rob Manfred said that there's some buzz around the idea of once a game, every team gets a chance to send their best hitter to the plate in a big time moment. So if you have bases loaded in the sixth inning, and for the Royals' sake, like Dairon Blanco's up. Well, if Bobby Wood Jr. is not on base, he can come up to the plate and hit. That would be the golden at bat, right? And I, for one, think it's incredibly stupid. It takes away the value and the strategy of using a pinch hitter, sticking with your guy. Like, that's just messing with baseball a little bit too much. If I'm being honest, baseball fans don't want all these rule changes. And I would hate to speak for everybody here, but I feel like I'm headed in the right direction here. Baseball fans don't need all these rule changes. They just don't want blackout restrictions, right? Make the game watchable. You're wondering why it's not as popular. It's because you don't have everybody out there with easy access to watch the game. You don't have that accessible to the fans. The blackout restrictions is stupid. It's dumb. You should make every game accessible to everybody out there because people do want to watch, right? You shouldn't make it that difficult. The NFL, which of course dominates American sports when it comes to viewership and popularity, it's not hard at all to watch every NFL game. You got Red Zone, you got NFL Sunday Ticket, YouTube TV is what I use. Like, it's very easy to watch games. And when it comes to baseball, there's restrictions everywhere. There's this and that. Stop with the silly rule changes. Just make the game easy to watch. Like, I, for one, am always baffled that spring training games aren't all available to fans. Why is there a need to black out games to fans? We see some spring training games, and it's not that I'm naive to the fact that, broadcasters, they got to do a lot of games throughout the year, right? You've got, the Royals crew that's got to travel. They're doing 162. Even though they're trading off, they can do some spring training games. I'm not naive to that. And I don't think I would want them to have to do every single game in spring training because a lot of those games, the starters are gone by the second inning or they're not even playing that day. But why not give the opportunity for a spring training crew down there, a minor league broadcasting crew to call those games? So we've got more of an abundance of broadcasters getting their opportunity to call games at spring training. It doesn't need to be national TV, just on the MLB app. It's easy to watch the game, right? They're always on radio. So like we could have something work out in that way where baseball becomes a much easier sport to watch. You know about the team from the time pitchers and catchers report to the end of the year. You develop a connection with the team, unlike a lot of fans who show up to opening day and go, who's this guy? Who's this? When did we get this guy? It's because baseball makes it so hard for people to watch. You know, if I could speak to Rob Manfred directly, it's not about all these silly rules that make the game not watchable, or you're trying to appeal to the younger demographic. I would consider myself in the younger demographic. I don't care about the pitch clock. I don't care about the 3-batter minimum. I don't care about the bigger bases. I don't care about replay. I care about blackout restrictions. I care about fans not being able to watch. I hate it when I see people comment to me and go, well, I couldn't see the game tonight because I was in this place, or I'm not able to watch all year long. I get to go to one Royals game a year, and it's in person. But other than that, I don't get to watch them. I have to listen to them on radio, which isn't a bad thing if you like doing that. But baseball can make this easier on the fan. People want to watch the sport. They don't really care about the rules that are trying to be added in there. They just want to watch it. Make it easier. No more blackout restrictions. And I think you'd have a lot more happier baseball fans when they look at Rob Manfred. Okay, that'll do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to have our final episode of the week, but it'll lead us into the winter meetings. Might talk on some of the bigger free agents out there and if they will sign next week. I think it was reported by Jeff Passan that Juan Soto should have an answer by Monday at the latest. So lots to go over. And then, of course, for Mailbag Friday, send in your questions. We won't have an episode, but I'll be sure to answer every single one of them either on Twitter or on YouTube. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.